In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Shot of Inspiration. I'm Greg Stevens, your host, and I'm excited this week because I met Pam Thompson a couple of weeks ago through a friend of ours, Chris Williams. You may have seen his episode, but Chris is a great connector of people. And Chris connected me with Pam, and I was just amazed by her stories. I was talking about her before we kicked on off the show a moment ago. I said, I'd really rather her tell you her background is really diverse, really different, but it's also very impressive. So, Pam, welcome to the show. And would you tell audience a little about yourself, your bio for everyone?
Well, thanks very much, Greg. I'm excited and looking forward to our conversation. I'm somebody who's been on the planet for a few decades now, and I'm also someone who gets bored. So I've done a variety of things in my life. I shouldn't admit to being bored, but anyway, I've had the opportunity to live and work on 5 continents. And I knew in my bones from about age 4 that I was going to travel around the world and be in service in some way. I didn't know what that would look like, but I knew it from a very young age. And that journey has led me from initially being a nurse and then getting special training in group and family therapy. So I used to do group and family therapy. And then I got into health promotion consulting, and I did a variety of things. At one point, I worked for a management consulting company that focused on international health and development. And we designed, consulted on, and managed international development projects around the world from a variety of sectors. And I was one of their health sector specialists. So that gave me the opportunity to manage a big HIV/AIDS surveillance project in Pakistan. I also led the design team and initial implementation of what's called the primary healthcare project in Nigeria. So a lot of interesting opportunities. And then I'll speak a bit later about Afghanistan. And that was really from my own consulting business. But yes, so I've had an opportunity to live and work in volatile environments, environments of uncertainty, and seem to be stimulated by I'm trying to think for some odd reason. And so I've consulted and managed, as I said, on teams and projects. So I've learned a lot of valuable lessons, I think, from that experience. And then most recently, in March of 2020, I was interviewed by a woman called Ingrid Boll, who's founder of a global social movement called Female Wave of Change. She founded it in the Netherlands about 7 years ago. And we believe that feminine leadership holds the key to creating a better world, a more conscious, equitable, just, sustainable, and peaceful one. And so we're now in about 43 countries. And my role as ambassador for Canada is to grow that community in Canada. So in order to do that, I incorporated a national nonprofit in December of 2020. Since about March of 2021, I've been having monthly meetings with featured guests and been leading this organization. So it's been an incredible opportunity to engage women who are into feminine leadership. And I should say, we also have men in our movement. So when I speak about feminine leadership qualities typically associated with the feminine, like collaboration, creativity, inclusiveness, emotional intelligence. So yeah, just so you know that. And we also work in 5 pillar areas: education, environment, economy, health, and humanity. And so that's been an amazing opportunity to develop a project in particular that we have that I'm very proud of, called the Mother Earth Ambassador Program. And it's a project for girls ages 9 to 12 to teach them about Mother Earth, the mother tree, and how to become Mother Earth ambassadors in their home schools and communities. So yeah, so we're rolling that out in the fall, and hopefully we get our numbers, and it's largely experiential outdoor in the forest. So
I love that. I love that you're taking that leadership role with and for women. That's why I didn't want to butcher your introduction because there was so much there rather than just read it off. I can tell you've got a passion for what you've been doing. Tell us how you got started with all this. You said at a young age, you really knew what you wanted to do. or had a vision around some of this. Walk us through your journey, how you got to where you are today, and some of the stories along the way of maybe even Afghanistan.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, it's always a bit of a conundrum. Where do you start and how much do you tell?
Yeah, always.
Anyway, yes, I grew up in a family where education was highly valued. Both of my parents were teachers. My dad was a high school math teacher and a coach because he was very athletic. And my mother was a kindergarten teacher. So the other thing to say is my mother was highly creative and she stayed out of the workforce for 16 years until my youngest sister started grade one, because there's quite an age gap between myself, I'm the eldest, and my two other sisters.
Okay.
So anyway, at about age 12 or 13, I observed that my dad I'll say appeared to have the power in the family. Little did I know later on that, in fact, my mom had a lot of influence. But when I was that age, I thought, he's got the power. He's the one making the money. He gets to go out of the house and do all these exciting things. I'm going to be like him. As a number of women that I've talked to who are higher achievers, it's like, and my dad also was somebody who'd always say, set the bar higher. Like when I was taking swimming lessons and we had a cottage and I would practice between two docks, he'd say, one more length, Pam, one more length. So I grew up always from that perspective of it. You can aim higher, keep aiming higher, which is a good thing. And it has its downfalls. And I really loved my dad. He was an amazing man and he totally valued me. And he had no son. So I feel like I was treated like a son because I got to do things like drive the boats from about age 11 at our cottage. I also got to mow the lawn and shovel snow as well as cook and clean inside. So I got to do it all, which isn't a bad thing. But anyway, so much fun. So I grew up to believe really that I could pretty well do anything I wanted to do. And so I feel very blessed to have had that kind of parenting.
I think your dad, you never know what parent, I think you get something from both, but I love that part of that is a legacy that he left you is to try to accomplish, try to get out and step out outside of your comfort zone, push that one more lap. I think that is a key ingredient to success. I believe that's one of the reasons you probably accomplished a lot of what you had because you took that on. At least it seems like that to me.
Thank you. Yes. So I continued on my journey. I did a number of things, and I guess some of the highlights are I worked for the federal government in Canada, and I got to co-chair a national strategy that had multiple partners. When I ended up being lured away from government, I was at a workshop on project management in the government environment, and the fellow who was leading the workshop, he pulled me aside because I was facilitating the group. And then I guess they wanted me to give the feedback. So I gave the key takeaways. And he approached me afterwards and said, where did you learn to facilitate? And I said, I just do it. I said, I'm trained in therapeutic groups. I used to do group and family therapy. He said, we need to talk. So within 6 months of that, on a handshake, I left my well-paying government position with benefits and all on a handshake, nothing written, to join the management consulting group. He was the R&D guy and there was a president VP. I worked with them for about 6 months and I did it based on the understanding of a really good per diem at the time. And then I'd probably only work with them 8 days a month. And I thought, this is really good. I could enjoy this. But about 3 months in, the work started to decrease. And then by 6 months, he had a philosophical split with two other owners and said, I'm going to create my own company. Do you want to join me, Pam? And at that point, I didn't commit because I didn't want to take sides, but I ended up starting my own business, sole proprietorship to start. And because when I was working with the federal government, I had a lot of national health professional organizations that were part of our partnership, like the Canadian Medical Association, the nurses, the physios, the OTs, all these folks. They'd seen me in that role because we were facilitators. I also had an amazing consultant who worked with me and with our team, and I learned so much with her. And anyway, I grew to realize that I loved to facilitate. So I started my first business in 1992, and it was called InPro Consulting. And I really focused on designing and facilitating multi-stakeholder consensus building workshops and consultations. The other thing is because I went to university for a bit and I became qualitative. I taught university at one point too. and I became a qualitative researcher. So I'm a words and concept person. I've learned quantitative stuff, but I'm really a words and concept person. So I love doing in-depth interviews and focus groups and rolling them up. So in any event, so I did that as well. And I'm quite a good writer. I learned that from my mother, who was an amazing writer as well. So I used to also research and write program and policy documents in the health field. So I had that business for about 10 and a half years. And then I started to chomp at the bit because I really wanted to do international work. And what I typically do when I'm looking for something new to do, a new direction, I will invite a colleague that I know or a friend of a friend out for lunch. And I'll say, give me the gems of wisdom from you from doing what you do. What are the key lessons? And who do you know that I might connect with? So the long and the short is I took a friend of mine who had done a lot of international work out for lunch. And I said, who would you recommend I connect with? So I ended up connecting with the VP, this office for this group that did international development consulting, as I mentioned in my bio. And it was an amazing adventure and really led me on the path to really giving me some more skills and leadership, leading a team in another country, but also learning more about myself. Because, Greg, you probably know this. If you work in other cultures, you tend to become self-aware because you notice what's different between your beliefs and practices and theirs.
Yeah.
Um,
We see the world as we are, not as it is. I don't know who said it, but they said traveling is the best education you'll ever have. It might have been Mark Twain. I'm not sure, but I believe that when you go into another culture and you start immerse yourself in that, you get to see how we've been conditioned, programmed from our perspective, but you start to see people as people sometimes for the first time. That was an insight for me rather than just comparing people to how I believed. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I had different parts along my journey, and sometimes the dates blur. A friend said, why don't you become a coach? And I thought, as I'm age and going to semi-retirement, that would be a really good thing to do because you can do it virtually, right? So I studied life and business coaching in 2008 and launched a coaching business in 2009. And I had a network of coaches in Canada and the States, and we coach people through a variety of life transitions. And it's very interesting because about 2008, I started to realize that creativity was really important. And I got a strong message that I was meant to start a creative healing center. And initially that really scared me because I thought, oh my goodness, I thought bricks and mortar, and I had no experience with that. And I thought, no, it's not going to be bricks and mortar. It's going to be a web. It's going to be on the web. So anyway, I had this small network of coaches in Canada and the States, and they all were specialized like in career transitions, divorce, whatever it was. And then we had a computerized assessment tool that I spent a lot of time and energy on. The Creative Healing Center offered this coaching for people going through a variety of transitions. And it was based on coaching, life transition, the health promoting and healing benefits of the arts, Eastern psychology, and alternative modalities. So a lot of stuff. And as with some things in my life, I've discovered I think I was ahead of the curve on that one. And no one really understood the linkages. So we didn't get much ROI. And about after 18 months, I was really restless. And I didn't feel like we were reaching enough people because I'd done so much work in groups before. And I love seeing people spin off each other and the light bulbs going on and I'm stimulating one another. It's interesting, but I found that it wasn't quite as much my jam as when I was working with groups. So I started to do group coaching and that seemed to be really my thing. But in any event, 18 months in, I got really restless. I started to realize this link with my mother and the creative piece. And I started to think, you know what? I need to get out of my head into my body. And I started to take more and more personal growth courses, Greg. And I started to notice patterns in my life. I started to notice that focus on left brain as opposed to right brain, focused on mind versus body and no balance between the two. And I started to realize that in fact, throughout my life, whenever I got a message, whatever you want to call that, and I followed that message, it always would work out. Following the message to consult with my friend who had taken someone out for lunch, linking and ended up with a job, which I thought I'd be on their consultants roster. And next thing I knew, I was working full time for this international development consultant group, right? The point being this idea of reflecting. I also realized that when I listened to others, it didn't always go that way.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I really want to learn more about this body, getting out of my head and into my body. So I studied mindfulness, and then I studied this body centered coaching program. And we were on the last class, and it was via teleconference. And the facilitator asked for someone to demo the process, and no one was putting their hand up. So I said, well, I'll do it if nobody else wants to. So anyway, she said, find a line on the floor. So I was in my office, find a line on the floor, which I did. And she said, think about something that you really want. And now notice any negative beliefs or negative thoughts that come up for you related to that. And imagine each of them as a stone in knapsack on your back. And feel how heavy they are. Now release them and let them go. Then cross that line, however you wish. Run across it, jump across it, walk across it, and say aloud what you want. And I leapt across the line and I said, I want to play big. Within 2 weeks of that, I received an email inviting me to throw my hat into the ring for one of 3 positions in Afghanistan. And one of them had my name on it. It was Senior Technical Advisor, Strategic Planning and Performance Measurement. And I'm like, I had wanted to work in Pakistan for about 5 years, but it was so volatile. This is 2010, August 2010. And so I spoke with my husband and I said, something I'd really like to do. And it was a 9-month contract. It wasn't an in and out thing. It was like you actually lived on the ground in Afghanistan for 9 months. He said, I'll totally support you to do whatever you want. Some husbands would say, are you mad? But he knows me. And so he said, I'll support you, whatever you want to do. So within 2 weeks, I throw my hat into the ring. Within 2 weeks, I was part of the interview process. By mid-October, I was on the ground in Afghanistan, having signed a 9-month contract. So it went so quickly. So at that point, I'm like, oh my goodness. And the other thing that's ooey about this, Greg, is the line on the floor was an Afghan prayer mat. One of my technical team in Pakistan had gifted me a few years before.
That's good, isn't it?
That experience really reinforced for me the importance of listening to my body and listening to the messages that I was getting. And and it truly was a life-changing experience to live and work in a war zone. It truly was.
Pam, one of the things it keeps coming up that I'm hearing as we're talking, you've stepped into a lot of unknowns. And you said you followed that voice. When you hear that voice inside you, it seems to be the right voice each time. I believe a lot of people see that. I believe a lot of people, once they see it, they dismiss it or they are too scared to make the step. How were you able to, it seems like you kept taking those steps into the unknown. What causes you to do that compared to possibly someone else? What is it that pulls you in that direction?
That's a great question. A couple of things. One, being a coach, I do the top 5 core values. One of them is freedom, and adventure is another one. So I have those as part of my top 5 core values.
Right.
And I've always been curious from being a child. So I think that helps. Taking the opportunity. I did burn out at one point after Afghanistan. And I worked for a nonprofit that promoted women's and children's rights around the world. And they kept adding to my scope, even though I was a consultant. And it just, And then anyway, and so I took some time to pull back. So it's not all been unicorns and rainbows, but there's a lot. But when I pulled back and I slept, I turned down another contract with this group. And they basically got back to me and said, why are you saying no? And I said, because I want to create more balance in my life in 2013. It was like December 2012. At that time, I had no idea what that meant. And I didn't know how much time I was going to take off. Pretty scary. You're a consultant. That's how you earn your living. And then you turn down something that's going to give you part-time work for 6 months at least, right? Anyway, I knew that I had to take some time. So again, that was about listening. And after sleeping and doing a bunch of things, I studied mindfulness. I ended up being on, I'm going to do a plug for someone because I think she does really good work. Christine Closer. She used to do a transformational author experience. She used to do that. And she has a publishing company. And I actually published my first book with her. She did like a 20-day, really in-depth transformational learning experience where she had traditional publishers, non-traditional publishers, all sorts of people on it, authors from different genres. And so I was there and I listened to almost every one of them. And at the end of them, I pulled away and it's a whole bunch of the pieces of my life came together. And I just did a mind map and all this stuff flew out of it, right? And I knew then. And then I also got these 7 keys to what I call creative living, 7 keys to consciously cultivating improved health, happiness, fulfillment, and inner peace in your life. They're part of my first book called Learn to Dance with Life, the guide for high achieving women. And then I coached high achieving women, which was really fruitful. And I also ran a group coaching program called Staying Healthy in Body, Mind, and Spirit while living your passion. So I think taking pauses and taking the time to reflect and really listening to your body, ideally before you burn out, but taking regular pauses. And now what I do is I have about a 1-hour morning routine where I meditate, I do stretches that include yoga, and then I often pull an oracle card as well. So I do a lot of things before I hit the ground. And years ago, I used to hit the ground running. I'd get out of bed and I don't do that anymore. And if I don't do this, I notice my day is quite different. So that's, I think, a piece of wisdom to pass on for people who don't have a morning ritual to really do that. The other thing is spending time in nature. I'm fortunate to live about 10 minutes walk from the ocean and 10 minutes walk from an amazing park. It was built in the 1800s. So if I go out for at least 45 minutes a day, either by myself or with friends for a walk, and I just steep myself in nature. And if I don't do this, it negatively impacts me. It's really valuable. And we know that nature can teach us so much. Yeah. And that's for me, incredible learning. I'll just share, you may recall the news about 6 weeks into the pandemic, the air quality in China improved markedly, like only 6 weeks, because we weren't pumping all sorts of junk into the atmosphere, right? The dolphins started to swim in Venice, in the waters around Venice and the canals. And so to me, that was an incredible alert to us all to say, look at nature can heal herself if we let her. She's giving us a powerful message. And that, in fact, is where the inspiration for the Mother Earth Ambassador Project came, that I mentioned at the outset. Is I put a call out to members of Female Way of Change Canada. I said, anybody interested in co-creating a project on the environment, you don't have to be a subject matter expert. If you are, great, but you need to have a passion and or interest in the environment. And then within less than 6 months, we started with that funnel environment and we funneled down to this. We created the outcome statements, the key objectives, and the key content areas. And then fortunately, we got some money through a sponsor and some of our members to then hire a curriculum development consultant who actually worked with us to do the overall detailed program design and the facilitator's guide, right? But anyway, so the influence of nature is huge as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, you've written your first book. I know you've written another book and you're currently working on a third. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I've written a second book. The third one it's in my mind. And I'm probably taking some time off, but I can certainly share about the second and a little bit more if you're interested.
Please. Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about your book. And then I have some questions about your laser focus, what you want to do right now. So I want to get to that, but let's talk about your second book.
My second book was launched in December on Amazon, and it was really fun to write. And it's called The Exploits of Minerva, Reflections of a 60-something Woman. And the context is 6 women who've been part of a women's circle for more than 20 years, supporting each other through a variety of life transitions, finding the love of your life, losing the love of your life, burnout, separation, divorce, all those kinds of things, right? And I originally started, and it's told through the eyes of Minerva, who's playful and sensitive, and she's partly autobiographical. But her essence came to me would you believe, when I was riding on a bike trail in Ottawa, where I used to live about 25 years ago. And then she said, write about me. And I was busy launching my first consulting business. My kids were like preteens. I'm like, don't have time. And then she came back to me about 4 years ago and said, okay, you have to write about me now. So anyway, I started to write this book as fiction. And when I got my publisher and the evaluation, the manuscript reviewer she writes back this part self-help, part memoir. And I'm like, didn't she read the genre? It's meant to be fiction, right? Because I have the book, the story. And then I talked to my publishing coordinator and we're talking and she said, Pam, based on what you're telling me, because her role was not to read the manuscript, she said, I think it's creative nonfiction. I'm like, what the goodness is that? So I looked it up. And I Googled it. Sure enough, it's creative nonfiction. So the stories are real and raw. I interviewed friends and friends of friends related to their transitions and then created composite characters. And some of it is me. So anyway, so if creative nonfiction there's some reality in it. A lot of the story is real, but there's also an element of creativity, right? And how I'm in a women's circle. I've been in it for 4 years, not 20. I focused on transitions. And so in our women's circle, we have experientials. So every few women's circles, we introduce an experiential exercise. So in the book, I have one of the characters introduce my art of change framework, right? That is based on personal and professional transitions, right? And supporting people through them. So anyway, that's my second book. And so that was really fun. And then my third book, as you can tell, I really feel close to Afghanistan. I actually have supported a man and his family, his extended family. He was being targeted by the Taliban to come to Canada to get out of Afghanistan. And through friends and family, we raised enough money to get he and his extended family to Canada, which was awesome. And then I also have some women who I know who were part of my team in Afghanistan who resettled in another part of Canada. And I have friends there and they supported them to find a place to live and outfit them. My heart is very much with the women and the men and the whole situation in Afghanistan. And a lot of people do not understand Islam and are very afraid of it. And they think all Muslim men are the same, all people who believe in Islam are the same. And we know they're not, right?
Right.
I want to dispel some myths about that. And I find through story, people will listen more than through nonfiction often. What I want to do is write an historical fiction novel with Afghanistan as the backdrop. And I will interview some people still in Afghanistan and other ones who are in Canada now to help me create characters. And I'm doing a lot of background research on the history from different perspectives so that I also want that as a backdrop.
I love that because I believe you can open some eyes about how we put people in a box and we think they're that way and we're just not. And so I love that your next book is about that. That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Tell us real quick, because I want to also make sure people know how to get your book, how they can get in contact with you, but also what is your laser focus right now? What is it you want to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? And how can people maybe listening who may be called to help you or support what you're doing? What would you like to ask of the listeners in essence?
That's very kind of you to ask that question. 3 to 5 years, laser focus. Here's the thing I've been playing quite a bit. And
Well, you got to regenerate. You can't just go do it. I can promise you that.
in addition to starting to write my book and actually doing some Googling and maybe taking a course on historical fiction writing, because I really would love to learn how to write really good historical fiction that draws people in, right? It takes them on a journey. In addition to that, I have a course I purchased about 18 months ago on creating audiobooks. And I would like to turn my 2 books, Learning to Dance with Life, a guide for high achieving women, and The Exploits of Minerva, into audiobooks. So that's on my radar to do fairly quickly. I also have an ongoing course that I developed last summer, and then I was going to launch in September. I decided not to because I had too many things going on. And it's about reinventing yourself. And it also has a lot of stuff on transition. So it's on the back burner. I have to see if that feels right to do it. But again, I really am listening in to what I'm meant to do. I know I'm meant to do a lot of creative work. I want to write some more books. I'm not sure what the other ones are going to be on. So really, right now, I would love for people to read my books if they're of interest to them. If people are interested in the idea of reinventing yourself at different points in life, I would welcome people to approach me. I've done some market research, but always eager. The other thing is I love being on podcasts. I love speaking and doing workshops on change and uncertainty. And I've had a lot of experience to draw on based on working in uncertain environments. So if people are interested in a speaker or a podcast guest, that's one thing. And I am open to possibility. I'm actually officially handing over the reins of the leadership of Female Wave Change Canada at the end of September. I came to this realization again. It's like feeling it in your body. And much as I loved on growing this organization, I just felt it was time to let go. So I put it out to my board only a couple months ago and said, I'm done by the end of September. And I said, we need to brainstorm names. And we ended up with a co-chair model, which I think is brilliant because in feminine leadership, it's about co-creating collaboration. So no instead of one person leading the charge, that it's going to be two amazing women. And one of them's currently on my board. I'm creating more space.
Right.
And I'm open to possibility. So
That's great. I love that. And we're going to post all your information on our website and how people can get a hold of you. But just so people, maybe they're not around a pen or something right now, maybe could you verbalize how people can get a hold of you? What's the best way
Sure.
they could do that?
Sure, the best way. Thank you. I'm on LinkedIn. My website is Pamela-Thompson.com, and there's a contact page there. And my email address is pam@creativelivingcommunity.com. And it's all lowercase. That was a previous URL, but I've had a number of websites and I didn't want to have any other email address. That's the old URL, pam@creativelivingcommunity.com.
So they can get a hold of the book by reaching out that way as well, correct?
Or on Amazon. My books are on Amazon. So
Give us the names one more time. Give us both the names.
Learning to Dance with Life, a guide for high achieving women. And by the way, men have read it too. And The Exploits of Minerva, Reflections of a 60-something woman.
Pam, thank you so much. I really loved having you on, and I love hearing about your journey because to me, you have a spirit of, like you said, adventure. And I love that. I think that's what life is here for. I don't think we're going to sit on our couches one day and go, I wish I would have spent more time here. I think we've spent more time in the unknown. So thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing how we can get a hold of you. Everyone, thank you for being here for another shot of inspiration. I'll see you next time. I'm Greg Stevens. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.